Okay, section 9.3, we're going to learn how to complete the square to make a perfect trinomial square. All right. Now, if you recall, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Then we have this linear equation here with 6x plus 9. Remember that is 6x to the first, so it has the degree of 1. Any equation that has a degree of 1 being the highest degree is called a linear equation. You all can solve that very, very easily. A quadratic equation is when the highest degree is 2. So the highest degree is 2 is a quadratic equation. And so we're focusing on quadratic equations at this point. Now we're going to take here, we want to see, is this a perfect trinomial square? You all know how to do that. So we're going to factor it. So we factor it x plus 3 times x plus 3, but we got to make sure. We know that x squared is a perfect square. We know that 9 is a perfect square, right? Because 3 times 3. But do we get the middle term? Remember, how did we determine to get the middle term? Well, you take this and you get 3 times x, and you ask yourself if that is doubled and you get the middle term. In this case, when it's doubled, we did get 6x. That is the middle term. So then it is a perfect trinomial square, and of course it always has to have a positive constant. So this is a perfect trinomial square. But what if I give you this? I said x squared plus blank x plus 9. And I ask you to fill in the blank so that it is a perfect square. What are you going to do, right? Well, the first thing you're going to do is what? You know that what? That this here, the perfect square is 3, so if I took 3x times 2, that would give me 6x, right? So I'm going to take the square root of 9 and get 3, and then I'm going to double it, right? Square root of 9 and get 3, and then I'm going to double it, right? That's kind of what we're doing here, and we got that 6x. Now what if I gave you this? I said x squared plus 6x plus blank. How do we go about finding what is that constant term, the third term? What are you going to do? Well, that's very simple. Think about it this way. If in this case to get the middle term we multiplied by 2, right? Then we're going to take the 6x and we're going to take half of the 6, which is 3. Then we're going to take that 3 and square it, and we get 9. That tells us the middle term. So what did I do? I took the coefficient of the x, the linear term, which is 6. I multiplied it times 1/2. I got 3, and then I squared it, and I got 9. All right, so this is what I did, right? I found 1/2 of the linear coefficient, then I squared that result, right? And then I added it to the original quadratic equation. So what I have done here in this particular right here, because this is the kind of problems you're going to be getting, is I completed the square. I was given x squared plus 6x. I wanted to complete it so that it made a perfect trinomial square, and that's the process of called completing the square. So now try completing the squares on these problems. I'll do one more for you, and then I'm going to have you do the next two. So we're completing the square. We have x squared plus 10. And let's see. I want to put my directions down there. There we go. X squared plus 10x plus what? What would that c constant be? Well, remember, what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to take this constant 10. I'm going to multiply it by 1/2, and I get 5. Then I'm going to take that result, 5, I'm going to square it, and I get 25. And then I'm going to add that, and I now have the perfect trinomial square. If I was to factor that, right? You can verify that I can factor the square completely now, correct? Because in this case, it's going to be x plus 5 times x plus 5, or you might think of it as x plus 5 quantity squared. All right, so I have completed that particular trinomial into a perfect trinomial square. Let's look at the next one. Try doing the next one on your own, following those rules. And before you do, let's look at this. Instead of putting 25 here, what if I had written this as x squared plus 10x plus, remember it's 5 squared, because 5 squared is 25, and I left it as 5 squared instead of putting 25. Then I automatically know this is going to break down to 5. And it's a good idea sometimes to write it this way instead of this way, because when you go to factor it later on, if it's a large number, you don't have to worry about it, right? You already know what it is. So try the next one. You might want to stop and then go on. I'm going to assume that you have. So here we have x squared plus 5x plus, again, we want to complete that square. So I'm going to take the coefficient of the x. I'm going to multiply it by 1/2, which gives me 5/2. I'm going to take that result and square it. That gives me 25/4. And so 25/4 would be the completing the square. If I want to factor that now, a trinomial, it would be x plus x plus plus, and not 25/4, but 5/2, 5/2, because it is 5/2 squared, right? And now I have factored it. Okay. So this here is completing the square. Try the next one. I need to make it zoom. All right, here we go. So we've got the coefficient, negative 1/2. We have to multiply it by 1/2. That gives me negative 1/4. We want to take that negative 1/4 and we want to square that. Remember, a negative times a negative becomes positive. So we end up with 1/16. So 1/16 would be the answer if we completed our square. Now if I was to factor that trinomial square, it would be x, right? And then it would be what? Now pay attention here. It would be negative 1/4 times negative 1/4. All right, negative 1/4 times negative 1/4, just like this was 5/2, 5/2. And I'm also going to write this over here, just so you know that's the same thing. And then this would be the same thing, squared. Okay, that's the whole idea. All right. So now what you've done is you've completed the square. And that's all you're doing in section 9.3 is completing the squares. And so if your homework basically is they're asking you to complete the square, which is what this is. So when you complete the square, this is your number, and then they're asking you to factor it. So these are the two things that they're looking for in your homework for section 9.3.